Traditional, design and build, construction management and PFI are all commonly used forms of procurement. And they're all, according to the CIOB, essentially a series of calculated risks. Well, in this programme, we're going to look at how a new code of practice, British Standard 8534, hopes to mitigate those risks and provide guidance through the procurement process. And here to explain and cast his judgment on BS 8534, I'm delighted to welcome Davis Langdon's John Connaughton. John, many thanks for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Nice to meet you. So what do we have here? A series of calculated risks. That's how the CIOB views procurement. So what do you reckon? Have they got that right? What do you think they mean by that?
Yes, I think they have got it right. I think procurement is essentially a purchasing process, which is normally very simple if we go to buy a product or a commodity available off the shelf in a high street shop. When we come to construction, the procurement process is much more complex, mainly because it takes some time to define exactly what you want. And you do that through the contract, which effectively allocates risk between the parties.
OK, well, let's start by nailing down the purpose of this particular document. Who is it aimed at, first of all?
Essentially, it's aimed at clients, people who procure construction, and indeed those who advise them. It can also be used by people in the supply chain, those who provide construction services, construction products. But its main focus is on the procurement agents, if you like.
Now, British standards are normally very technical, aren't they, dealing with details.
Yes.
Is this something of a change for them? I get the feeling it is.
Yes, it's quite a change. This isn't a technical standard as one might expect from the British Standards Institution. It is more a good practice guide. And in some senses, British Standards Institution are starting to move more into the kind of general guidance market, particularly in construction.
Well, let's take a moment then to familiarise ourselves with our document, the new standard. There are 8 clauses in BS 8534. The meat of the document starts really at Clause 5, initiation. Clause 6 is procurement strategy. Clause 7 is procurement tactics, and then Clause 8 is managing performance. Well, John, the first 3 clauses are really admin, aren't they? So let's move on then to Clause 4, policy. Does that say anything useful?
Not a huge amount. It gives quite a useful checklist for what typically could be in a procurement policy. And in many respects, if clients did follow that guidance and developed a procurement policy, it would help them through the procurement process. But there's nothing novel or new in that particular section.
OK, and it's not very long either, is it?
It's not very long at all. It's about half a page to a page, I think.
Right. Clause 5 then, initiation, that's a bit longer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anything useful there?
Yes, some very useful things in Clause 5. Clause 5 talks a lot about the kind of preparatory work necessary to kind of drive through an effective procurement process, developing the business need, understanding the business need, developing a business case, and so forth. And in a way, this is where this particular BS differs from a lot of other procurement guidance in that it sets all of that within a business context. So that's a very welcome.
Yes, that's quite helpful. So this is the only place you're going to get that information.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's an emphasis as well on front-end activities, isn't there?
Yes.
What do they mean by that?
Again, preparation of business case. But interestingly here, they identify a need for value management, formal value management, which is effectively a process of identifying the value that the client or the user wants from the construction project, and then ensuring that is managed through the procurement process.
And then they pick up on stakeholders, for example, and their requirements.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, again, stakeholder identification and engagement is a key element of procurement, particularly in the public sector, where, of course, stakeholders can be, a very broad constituency of potential users and those who, might be affected by the construction project.
Value management, that comes in at this point as well, doesn't it? How helpful is that?
Very helpful. A lot of practitioners now are using value management in construction quite extensively. And it is basically a challenging process at the front of a project that questions the very need for the project in the first place and whether initial proposals are going to fulfill that need. So it's a very effective formal process of ensuring that you're getting what you really want.
Yes, and it's interesting, the angle they're going for is very much making the business case, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
And that's quite a new thing coming through.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of procurement guidance concentrates very much on the mechanics. This one concentrates rather more on getting the kind of business essentials right and setting the whole process within this business sort of cycle, business process, and that is very welcome. And in fact, probably one of the key features of this guide.
Although I have to say, it very much concentrates on the preparation with regard to the business focus,
Yes.
rather than the procurement itself. Do you think they've missed a trick there?
I do. I mean, we might go on to talk about some aspects where, you know, we feel the guidance is weak. And I think they have very much concentrated on those front-end preparatory activities at the expense of, if you like, the mechanics of the procurement process, where unfortunately a lot of procurement goes wrong.
Yeah, well, we'll save that for just a moment because the meat of the document is in the next two clauses. That's clause 6, procurement strategy, which kicks off by highlighting the need for a feasibility study, also client briefs and how to go about funding. And it explains the different forms of procurement. So I'm just worried about whether that's kind of teaching grandmother to suck eggs a bit. I mean, did you think that when you looked at that?
I did, unfortunately. There is a lot of very generalised guidance here, which is available in lots of other publications from the the former Office of Government Commerce and so forth.
Yeah, I guess the danger with that, John, is people are going to they'll look at that and go, oh, I've seen that already, I know that already, and toss it to one side.
Yes,
and then they miss some valuable moments.
That is a risk, because the guidance does contain quite useful stuff, but, you know, you've got to fillet it out. You've got to pick out what is essentially, you know, valuable from this. There are some useful tabular information. For example, there's a table on procurement variables, which, you know, I haven't really seen before in that form in other guidance. That table on procurement variables is not that closely linked to a flow diagram on procurement methods, and I think tightening all of that up and making it easier for the user to find a clear path through would have been a better approach. I think.
So what about other things like supply chain integration, bidder engagement? Are they fully covered?
I think this is where the guide is actually quite good. I think a lot of procurement guidance doesn't pay very much attention to that whole process of engaging the supply side and engaging those who might want to bid for the project. And to be fair, the guide is quite good on this. But again, it could be that bit stronger, and it talks about bidder days and so forth. But again, some more guidance as to how they might be managed and run would be better, rather than, you know, the more generalised stuff on how to manage a project.
There was one thing I was quite interested in. There's this reference to warming up the market.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Well, that's certainly professionally, I would think that's absolutely essential. You know, if you are going, particularly with a large construction project, you want to be sure that the market is ready for it. You want to be sure that there's capability in the market. And very often there isn't. You know, you've got to go and meet with suppliers, meet with contractors to ensure that they can actually do what you want to do. And, you know, I would consider that to be an absolutely vital part of procurement. And as I say, it's typically missed out of a lot of current procurement guidance.
But it's a very useful tip, and that's what you
Absolutely,
want. It's
and that's what
benefiting
you
from other
want.
people's experience.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And it's that, you know, bringing out those learning points, you know, is absolutely key. And I feel, you know, there could almost be a sort of a bullet point summary of this document.
Yeah. So right good as far as it goes in that respect, but you'd actually have liked more.
I'd have liked more, certainly.
Yeah. OK, well, according to a recent CIOB survey, 82% of respondents believed suicide bidding, that's the practice of fielding an impossibly low bid in order to win the tender, was a real problem within the industry. Section 6, subclause 3.4, acknowledges the problem, and it states abnormally low bids should not be automatically accepted. What do you make of this, John?
This is a genuine problem, particularly in the current construction industry, where tender levels are very, very low.
It's quite refreshing that they've been upfront about that.
Absolutely. I think, again, they could have gone further here, because after all, what is an abnormally low bid?
Yes, they're not very specific,
They're not very specific, and they could have given some clearer guidance around the sort of bid levels that might be acceptable.
Yes. OK, what does the standard have to say about pre-qualification and shortlisting? Because they're two very important procurement issues.
Absolutely. You know, if we're looking at preparation, although we talked earlier about the need for a good business case, there is also a lot of preparation you need to do for the procurement process itself, and the pre-qualification of bidders is very, very important. And there is a document, PAS 91, which covers this, and that's actually quite comprehensive. But they do say something like, you know, you should not have excessively high numbers of tenderers, and I think it's very difficult, particularly in the current market where you get lots of interest, and particularly in the public sector, they tend, you know, to be a little bit reluctant to limit the market. But I think this is something where the private sector, you know, procurers work very, very well. I think they are more confident in limiting, you know, the available market to their particular requirements.
Let's think about private sector versus public
Yes.
sector, because very often the public sector has less informed stakeholders, if I can put it like that. Is this standard going to help them?
I think it is going to help them a lot, and particularly procurers who are not very experienced in the public sector. I think, though, this precise areas where the public sector could actually learn a lot from the private sector. And I think I said earlier that the private sector are very good at making judgments about, how many suppliers to include in a tender list, how short that list could be, and they're a bit more confident about stating what their requirements are typically. But I think the guidance will certainly help public sector procurers.
The problem, though, is, John, however many checklists you've got, whatever sort of complex score system you've got, it's no substitute for sound judgment, is it? And if you don't have experience in that area, where do you get it from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this particular issue has probably bedeviled public sector procurement over the years, and it's still not resolved. Again, I think the BS could have helped here, because again, I think the private sector is actually quite good at making those kinds of judgments and recognising that procurement isn't an entirely mechanistic process, that it does require an element of judgment.
OK. Were they prepared to stick their necks out a little bit more in this new standard when it comes to cost effectiveness and transparency?
Again, I think so. This is something that I thought was quite well dealt with in the standard. The fact that they did reference cost effectiveness, the need for setting budgets, the need for a good cost management process throughout the process to ensure that those budgets are adhered to. So I think they have kind of identified that quite well, and that's, again, a welcome addition to the sort of procurement literature.
They got that bit right.
I think so, yeah.
Right. It's a bit of a curate's egg altogether, isn't it? It's good in parts.
Good
is
in
that
parts.
what you'd say on the school report?
I think ultimately, yes. Probably give it 6 or 7 out of 10 on the school report, yeah.
Well, John, thank you very much for that. And before we go, I should remind you there are plenty of other sources of procurement information, notably PAS 91, and the International Standardisation Organisation has published ISO 10845. And as well as those and the sources printed at the back of the new British Standard, we've asked John for some other recommendations, and he tells us that you should dip into these. The former Office of Government Commerce's Achieving Excellence Guides, the former Construction Industry Board Codes of Practice, and the Aqua Group Guide to Procurement. That's by Mark Hackett, Ian Robinson and Gary Statham. And there, having left you with plenty of food for thought, we'll say goodbye. So many thanks to John for his candid appraisal of British Standard 8534. I hope they forgive him. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Thank you very much indeed, John.